Amon is a ex-cultist turned warrior poet who really does not like vault monsters. He is our largest character that we have ever made, even taller than Brick. He's a Viking. He is destruction incarnate. Amon is all about hitting hard and hitting fast. He comes on strong and he pretty much finishes the fight. If you're the kind of guy who wants to get up into people's faces, take down enemies that are larger than you, and look good doing it, he's your guy. Amon's Cybernetics tree is all about summoning his weapons. He already summons them in his hands to, slap people in the face, but he can actually also summon autonomous drones. So you can have a floating sword, a floating axe, and a floating hammer, kind of tag teaming up against all the adversity that you come across. Fun thing about Amon is that he actually gets what's called the Forge skill, and the Crucible's Forge skill, which is a secondary action skill, will actually see him take both axes, snap them together, and throw them at his enemies. It'll go out, it'll return, and it'll hit and damage people in both directions. And if it hits any of those axes, it'll also cause massive explosions.
For Amon's Cybernetics tree, this really focuses in on his axes, both fire and ice. You have augments that allow you to change out the types. So not only can you throw the axes, which is what you start with, you can also change it to throw hammers, and you can even throw some swords. So for example, if you decide to stick with the axes, you have one where if you throw the ice one, you can actually pierce through enemies.
Amon's Crucible sees him take out 2 elemental axes. One is fire and one is frost that you can chuck into your enemies to deal massive elemental damage. And if you end up killing them, they'll actually explode.
What makes Amon's Crucible a really cool skill to use is it kind of sells this sensation of being this big hulking Viking when you're going around with your 2 forge axes, and you got one with fire, you got one in ice, and being able to just throw them around, pick them up, and chain it between enemies is something that feels really cool to do.
Amon's Vengeance tree is all about taking lots of damage and dealing back out. Special mechanic for that tree is something called Elemental Affinities, where he will actually get rewarded for killing enemies with specific elemental types and doing different elemental attacks. So he can create a gigantic ground fissure to ignite his enemies. He can summon lightning bolts from the sky to zap them. It's a really good time.
For Amon's Vengeance tree, this focuses in on his shield. More particularly, there are skills that will allow him to use the Forge Wave ability that comes from his shield to explode on enemies. You have something that allows him to taunt, which really helps if you're actually playing with friends, and we do encourage that. You can also throw the shield. For those of you who are familiar with the pre-sequel, that might feel a little familiar to you. There's also the option to use a spear instead of his whip, which when you throw it, it bursts into shock damage.
Amon's Scourge action skill sees him take out a gigantic shield to absorb lots of damage, which will then actually transform into a elemental whip where he can take that energy and toss it back at his enemies. The Forge skill that is associated with Scourge is actually called Firewall, which, as the name might imply, makes a giant wall of fire that will deal damage to enemies who pass through it, block projectiles that are coming in, and buff your projectiles going out.
What makes this one particularly badass is the sensation of becoming a tank. You get to whip out a shield and also a literal whip. So you get to sit there and just soak up damage either for yourself to give yourself some breathing room, or when you're playing with friends, get in the mix and drag the attention to yourself.
Amon's Calamity tree is all about bringing the fight to enemies. Empower your fist in so many different ways that I think players are really going to enjoy. The main mechanic is to actually cause weakness to your enemies, which makes them deal significantly less damage and take a little bit more damage. And there's specific ways in that tree to make those that you have inflicted weakness upon explode, and it's pretty nice.
For Amon's Calamity tree, one of the options for this allows you to really up your durability. This particular augment will allow you to buff yourself back up in order to stay in the fight a lot longer. You have the option for the Rocket Punch to change its elements to suit your particular needs. You even have the option to allow the punch to have its own follow-ups in order to actually execute enemies that are below a certain health threshold, which I'm personally always a fan of those kind of things. And it also has the option to prime enemies, which is a thing that's unique to Amon, which allows him to detonate enemies under specific conditions.
Amon's skill Onslaughter gives him an empowered fist to punch his enemies and dash across the battlefield. You can use it over and over, and you can use it while you're mixing it up with your guns to get into close range with like a shotgun, so you can do a 1-2 punch. The associated forge skill with Onslaughter is called Molten Slam, where you see Amon take out a gigantic hammer and just slam it to the ground, causing pretty much elemental devastation all around it.
This one is particularly badass because you get this nice, big, meaty, like fire hammer. Whenever you just get that wind up and that big explosion that happens afterwards once you slam it down is a really satisfying feeling. But also you do get a cool rocket punch as well. Like you do get a couple little things in there, so that's always fun too.
I call and iron answers.